Philomythia podcast.
I would do anything.
Sweet mystery of life, at last I found you.
You have a beautiful singing voice. So, so that's, I don't know why that's so funny to me when I see you take a drink of your drink and you make it sip on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It just reminds me of you being obnoxious for some reason. It's super funny.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. There's no better way to communicate that than
it's
loud
super
sips.
funny. So how are you there? I'm Ian, by the way.
I'm Philbert.
Philbert,
Jeremy.
Jarius.
Reginald. Jarius the second.
So I got a question for you there, Reginald.
I might have an answer for you. Depends.
Oh, was that your name, Reginald?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It is now.
So we've been doing this podcast for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I've now started seeing some new names pop up in people that follow us. So I just wanted to say hello to anyone that's new, or if
hello.
Hi, you should listen. Take a listen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was that your question?
Yes. That was my question for sure.
Cool. That's a good question.
I don't know why I phrased it to ask you a question. I think it was just to be a dick.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, I'm used to it.
Right. I mean,
just punch away.
You know how I operate. You know, my favorite thing to do is, hey, check it out, listen. Check it out, listen. You ready?
Let me tell you a story.
Let me tell you a story.
Yeah. Chirp. Chirp.
My friends know that I'll do that to get their attention, and then I don't say anything.
Nothing.
And they go, what? And I go, oh, nothing.
No, then I was talking.
Just saying things. So we can, we've definitely kind of have a habit of talking about our Friday night session at the beginning of this.
Mm-hmm.
So last night, if you've been listening, the other session I had a bit ago was a nightmare for me, but last night's session was an absolute joy.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. I had a great time. I watched my players do some crazy stuff, get some crazy stuff done, take a little bit of a sacrifice to allow other things to happen, and it was cool. I liked it. What did you think?
It was fun. I had a lot of fun. It was really nice to have some rules for Zoom etiquette in place.
Yeah.
Which has been a long time coming. I think just playing online in general is that playing online is not like playing in person.
Not at all.
In terms of how you talk to other people and not make it absolutely insane mainly probably for the dungeon master, but also players. Like when I started playing, I tried to be much more polite and passive, and if everybody's steamrolling, you can't really do that.
Right. If you're passive,
you're not gonna get any words out.
Right. You have to steamroll if you're trying to. When everyone's steamrolling, you have to steamroll back, or else no one will hear you.
No one will hear you.
And then that becomes a problem.
It does. So it was nice to put some strictures in place, even though there was some chafing at that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think once we got through it, I think everybody was like, okay, this makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So
I enjoyed it. And I think that you had an apt analogy for anyone listening, that if you do online gaming like this, Mr. Eric here had a very apt comparison. Would you like to share that?
Sure. I just thought of it as on Zoom, and I'm using Zoom as a blanket term for Skype and Google Hangouts or Discord, whatever you're using. But basically, it's like you have one ear, and everybody's talking into that ear. So if everybody's talking at the same time, who's ever trying to listen wants to murder everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this because we record all our games. I've listened to the recordings, and when everybody's speaking at the same time, it's just an ocean of noise.
Right.
You can't make out anything. So you've got this one little funnel that all the information's going through. So everybody needs to be more mindful if any communication's going to get through.
This is true.
You know.
And what I did was I pretty much told my group, hey, if you want to bullshit with each other and say things, type it in the chat. Like, put it in the chat, and anyone that wants to pay attention to that stuff, go to the chat and do that in there. And if you actually need to say something in game, then you can say it. Or if we're having like a little bit of crosstalk, which is cool, just a little bit, that's fine too. But for the majority of it, keep it in the chat. It makes it easier for the GM. It makes it easier for players that are trying to do something. You're not having to hear people go, what, 100 times because someone talked and then someone thought they were done and started talking, and then it's just a crosstalk of insane. Yes.
Crosstalk of insane. That's the new 9th level spell.
Insane.
Crosstalk of insane.
So yeah,
Insane's crosstalk.
Insane's crosstalk. Speaking of weird characters in a game, today's episode, what are we talking about, Eric?
So back by popular request, not that we weren't going to come back to it, but we are jumping back into our homebrew campaign world, Hylica, and fleshing it out, getting more specific with maybe some cities or some of the races, and giving it a little more meat on the bones now.
Yeah.
You know, so about halfway through this week, around Wednesday, I was like, what the fuck are we going to talk about? I have no ideas. So I actually went back and listened to the 2 previous episodes where we have built this world out and started thinking about it. And it was actually really fun. I started getting a lot of ideas. And it's based on Faerun, so there's a lot of lore to mine to get ideas.
Yeah.
So that's the one fun thing to build a campaign world within a campaign world, so to speak, is you got lots of info from other people who have already done the heavy lifting for you, you know?
Oh, nice. Yeah. I love that.
So, yeah.
I mean, anyone listening, you could do that kind of thing with any of these campaign books. If you just flip through them, and if you find some interesting stuff, scrape that shit out, throw it in yours, make it your own.
You could even, you know, we talked about Dragonlance and Alexandria last episode. You could even say, oh, I'm going to do this campaign world, but it's going to be a parallel universe version of it. And then just, you know, take the machete to it until it's unrecognizable.
Yeah. Slash that shit up.
Slash it up, remix it, make it so different that suddenly it becomes your own world.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I don't know, do you think we should talk a little bit about what's established already, or should we just kind of...
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you will have the key to that kind of thing.
Well, that's why I figured I would do the recap, so that's why I listened. That was a part of it.
Cool.
So I'm not going to get into all the details. I'm going to go over the main points, because a lot of it we're still kind of like, oh, this is a cool idea. Maybe we should do this.
For sure.
And it might be fun today to establish some concrete things like, okay, this is the big bad, or this is a city that exists for sure.
Okay.
Don't have to do it, but it might be fun because we've been very kind of vague and washy with a lot of it. So Hylika is the name we came up for the campaign world, and the idea is basically, I think for a while we were calling the campaign Gnostic Nightmares, because the idea is that the characters work for this organization that controls magic. Magic is very corrosive, and it corrupts anybody who uses it. So there's this big brother type organization that controls the use of magic. So we picked a part of Faerun where there's this inner sea called the Sea of Fallen Stars to base our actual setting on. So if you look at the map, that's where it was. And I actually got this screenshot of a piece of Faerun too, so we can actually look at it if we want to.
Oh, like the area that we kind of cut out?
Yeah, because I went back and listened, and then I just tried to, I mean, it's not exact, but just pull a piece out. So we can look at that if you want.
Oh, I'd love to. Cool. I did have a question while we're introducing this, and I think this would be a good time to kind of do what you're saying and settle on one detail. Where we've kind of cut this place out.
Mm-hmm.
At the edges, what is there?
You mean like what's the border?
Have we talked about that?
So we have talked about it, but again, it's very vague. So we were like, there's some kind of barrier. Takes about a day to cross through. I feel like if you go in deep, you just die. Like there's no getting through it. You just disappear somehow. Maybe it's like a spiritual acid or something. I don't know.
I like that.
You gave the analogy of the First Sword of Truth book.
Right.
So like it's not like a wall. It's a barrier. And I had the idea from the Alva Maker series where as you walk towards it, it's enchanted, so you suddenly find yourself walking away and you're not sure.
Oh, that's
how.
right.
But that's more of the security set in place.
Okay.
The idea I had thinking about it over the last few days is, what if this bubble is actually made out of pure chaos? Like pure arcane force, something that no living thing can actually touch and survive.
Oh, I love that.
And there's this idea from Faerun during the Spellplague called blue fire. And anything blue fire touches it immediately kills. And so I was like, what if it's tied to blue fire, since we've talked about maybe that's when Hylica was established, was during the Spellplague? Mm-hmm. Or the Sundering. We'll get into the Sundering because I had another idea too. Or the Second Sundering, excuse me, not the first one. So that was my idea. I actually thought about that, was maybe some kind of chaos, or even the elemental chaos, which is different. We don't have to get too far into that today, but
I definitely think that we should establish that the border is not something that can be crossed.
Yeah.
It will kill you, and as GMs or as the creators of what we're doing, we'll play with that.
Right, and maybe there's ways for players to get around that, but
right,
established in the lore is like, you'll die if you go out there.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. But I really like the idea of associating it to this blue flame, possibly.
Yeah.
Whether it is blue flame or whether it's something just changed from that era or something. So yeah. All right, keep going.
So hard boundary there. Mm-hmm. And the idea we originally had was, what if the big bad basically was keeping this world in place? Because this is not a place you want to live. It's not a nice world full of bells and whistles. There's bells and whistles, but they chime the sounds of doom when they ring. So, and then I came up with the idea, because I just like turning things on their head. What if the big bad and the head of this organization was actually Elminster? Mm-hmm. So Elminster, for some reason, was keeping things in place, and the PCs working for the organization are actually helping the villains of our campaign world to further their goals. And that was basically it. We talked about it having a Mediterranean or Greek feel from ancient Greece. Mm-hmm. And because the Sea of Fallen Stars is literally in the middle of our map, there'd be a lot of seafaring type of adventures. Everybody has some kind of sailing skill, even if it's just a little bit. There's probably a lot of aquatic races and a lot of mystery to do with the sea. And that's pretty much all the important information. That's not every single piece, but that's the overview. There's this bubble world. It's cut off from everything. There's no way to escape as far as the common person knows. Mm-hmm. And there are evil or, nefarious powers keeping it in place. Yeah. Yeah. So that's where we're at right now.
Sweet. I love that. And now, how long, let's talk about the timeline, do you think? Mm-hmm. Sure. If we have it come through on the Spellplague, that happens.
The
Spellplague. That happens before I don't remember the word you just used.
The Sundering?
Sundering.
Yeah. So the Second Sundering happens, I want to say, the Second Sundering was a while ago. The Spellplague, I actually have the dates for. That happens from 1385 to 1395, so it's 10 years long, which is literally how long you said it should have been in the normal everyday world was 10 years.
Right.
So it perfectly fits into that. And it also gives you, after the Spellplague is over, Hylica comes back.
Yeah.
So you would have this clock that's running. where you could have the players start somewhere in the middle and then they have to reincorporate themselves into Faerun.
Right.
Now, the thing we had talked about was that inside Hylica, time works differently.
Yeah.
So thousands of years have passed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's cool because it allows you to change a lot of other things.
Yeah, I like that too. So, I mean, even the heroes, I mean, you could have a lot of different adventures throughout that. Mm-hmm. But one of your final type things, you could definitely set it up that your heroes are basically in the last few years of Hillika being outside of Faerun, and then bring it back in during their adventure to cause that type of chaos. But as far as like what we're talking about, Hillika is cut off from Faerun for thousands of years to the people in Hillika.
As far as their, from a subjective internal experience of anyone living in Hylica, it's been like 5,000 years.
I think that we should do 5,000, yeah.
Okay, it's a nice round number.
Yeah, and it's, 5 is half of 10, so. So it like you could piece it in there real well.
Yeah. So here's some fun, interesting ideas. So to go back to the Sundering, because it's like the Sundering also lasted 10 years. And what the Sundering means is that you have Abir and you have Toril, which are two different planets. And they used to be one place. And then Ao, the god, the overgod, he basically tore them in two. And so the Sundering is tearing those two worlds apart. So the elemental chaos and like a lot of the evil elemental creatures went to Abir, and then Toril was run by the gods in the astral plane and those powers. So it would be interesting if somehow Hylica straddles both worlds. Somehow it touches both. So you can use a lot of the elementals and a lot of that chaotic creative force in the campaign. And that ties into, you had the idea of this wandering storm that goes around.
Yeah, that's.
And I was like, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, that was like in the sea. It would just travel slowly.
You roll for it, yeah. And I was like, what if the storm is actually, and what do they call them? They're basically almost gods, but they're elementals. And I pulled up the page for Chan is an Archomental. And they're basically like semi-deific elemental beings. And they're also known as the princes of elemental evil. So you get into like the princes of the apocalypse, which is one of the campaign settings or one of the campaign modules.
Yeah.
And I was like, what if Chan is just pissed because she's stuck in this world? So she's just raging all the time. And so when Chan shows up, you basically have to like board your windows up. There's no way to control her.
Yeah.
She's just raging. She's just causing chaos all the time.
For 5,000. I think that we should pull it from the Spellplague and do the Sundering, because I love the idea of it connecting the two worlds like that. I really think that that's a bit more interesting. And the idea also of the big bad or Elminster trapping one of these Arca, what was it?
It's very weird. I keep forgetting. Archomentals.
Archomentals within.
Yeah.
I think that's cool. I think that's really interesting.
Let me tell you this, because the blue fire comes from the Spellplague, so that's really cool. Abir still exists, so you don't necessarily have to have it tied to that. Here's why I like the Spellplague more than the Sundering, and I'm not saying I'm sold on one or the other, but I'm like, ooh, that makes a lot of sense. Is that Mystara was the patron goddess of magic, and then what is her name? There's another goddess who hates Mystara, so she has her murdered. And the weave, the tapestry that allows everyone to cast spells, falls apart. And guess who is a champion of Mystara? Elminster.
Oh.
He's like best friends with her. So I was like, what if he's so tapped into her that when she dies, it affects him deeply? And so my little, I'm not going to read it. Yeah, it's like 5 paragraphs. But what if the Spellplague happens and all magic's torn asunder, and we're talking about like one of the high level magic users of Faerun, right?
Right.
Somehow this magical anti-force hits into him, or he's touched by the blue flame or something, and he suddenly syncs up with all his parallel selves. It's like all possibilities condensed to one point, and he starts to go insane. So he tries to cast what's called a mythal, and a mythal is like a barrier to save you, like keep you buffered from magic, because he doesn't understand what's going on, and that mythal backfires because it's a Spellplague, and that's what creates Hylica.
Oh, I love this.
So I was like, that's a really interesting idea, whether we use every single detail, but I'm like, ooh, you have Mystara, you have the blue flame, and if we're going to use Elminster, all of those are wrapped up in a nice little bow. So that's why I was like, you can still have the Sundering be involved, but I feel like the Spellplague is just kind of fits hand in glove.
Well, I think when you add the Elminster aspect like that, everything, like, again, this is classic campaign writing. You think something's really cool, and then another idea gets dropped. You're like, well, what about this? You're like,
that's better.
Fuck the other cool idea. Let's do that one.
That's better. Yeah.
No, I love that. I think that's really interesting. Is like kind of the backstory of the hillika being created. It's perfect. Like,
that's almost unintended.
It's
at first. And Elminster has spent his time trying to get these other versions of him out of his head because he's going insane. And one day nothing works, and one day he kills one of them from across the Aether, and he feels relieved, and he suddenly gets more powerful. So he stumbles on to, hey, if I keep killing all these other versions of myself and absorb their power, I can become a god, and I can fix everything, because he doesn't know that Mystara is going to come back. He doesn't know that the Spellplague is going to end. So he thinks he's doing good things by doing evil. And I was like, remember how I was like, I want him to have some interesting motivation.
Yeah.
That's like, okay, that's interesting to me.
Yeah.
That's a cool motivation.
Trying to control magic within Hylica would also be an aspect of that, because it's like, it's dangerous right now. You shouldn't be using it. So it's almost like the villain, if you will, thinks that they're trying to do good by controlling that.
Now, here's an argument again for the Spellplague is, guess what race shows up when the Spellplague happens?
Dragonborn.
Yes. So you were talking about, I'm going to let you explain it, but you were talking about having some changes happen to the Dragonborn. So what if they just show up when Hylika appears? So they get blamed for being the cause, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
And they become these second-class citizens. And there's a lot of negativity thrown their way because people don't understand correlation doesn't equal causation, essentially. Right?
I agree.
So I'll let you talk about the Dragonborn if you want.
Oh, well, the idea I had shot to you, and I don't know if it really, I mean, it could still work in this, but as Hylica, what are we calling Hylica? Hylica.
You're calling it Hylica, and that's
I know.
I don't know why.
I don't know why.
That's
either.
fine. You can if you want.
I'm going to just make sure I change that.
Okay.
I think I love that idea, like the Dragonborn all of a sudden come to, and they are what Dragonborn are normally. And as time kind of progresses within this weird Hylica, the Dragonborn slightly change. And I think it would be interesting to pull their scales out a little bit so they start looking more human in a way. But their skin still carries the mark kind of like of the scales. Where like they seem like fine lines almost in the color that they're transcended from, or descended from, that they're descended from, would kind of be on their bodies still, and they would no longer have like a breath weapon.
Right.
It would be their bodies are kind of tuned to a certain element, if you will, that represents their dragon heritage. So like some may not, they'd be able to like touch acid for some reason and it wouldn't do anything to them, or the ones that are associated to the reds, they would be able to work with fire really well.
And maybe they have a natural resistance to being corrupted too.
Oh yeah, that would work.
They're affected by the elemental chaos, so that's what changed them, is they were able to adapt better than other beings, and that's also why they're hated, as people are suspicious.
Yeah. Oh, and I think that like they would definitely be, you know, in the history of Hylica, they've seen the Dragonborn change over these thousands of years. So they're still just second-class citizens, and they try to hide it. A lot of them try to do things so you can't see that they have these lines all over them, these marks on their body. And some of them, as time has progressed, some of them may only have it in certain places, or maybe some of them are born with like reptile eyes. So there's just certain things that still kind of manifest for these Dragonborn. I think that would be interesting.
I think it's cool.
Yeah, and they would still I think if you created a Dragonborn character, you would still get technically the Dragonborn stuff. It's just flavored all differently.
Yeah, it's flavored for this world. It might be cool if maybe they had some kind of chameleon-like ability where, since they have skin, more or less, with pigmentation, that they can actually change that pigmentation to match, like they can make their skin look flesh-colored.
Oh, I like that, actually. Yeah.
But it's like a concentration spell, so if they get hit and they fail concentration, suddenly their true pigmentation is revealed and everyone flips out,
Right. Or they only have to hide a certain aspect, and while they're working out in the world, maybe something happens and they get distracted and they lose that concentration.
They lose it, yeah.
And then people are like, there's one!
Dragonborn!
Get out of here!
Kill it!
Yeah, kill it or destroy it.
Imprison it.
It. You're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be somewhere else.
You're not supposed to be here.
So
no one's supposed to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like it.
But I think that's interesting to give one of, at least so far, just one of these races. I think we should mess with a few different versions of things slightly. Being in this bubble for 5,000 years would change some things.
Absolutely. I would love to flip some tropes on their head.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the dwarves are completely seafaring.
Oh, yeah.
So there's not really mountains, and so they are the ones who live in the Pirate Isles, maybe.
Oh, that's awesome, actually.
Something where it's because they've lost their natural home, which is the mountains, typically. So now they've had to adapt to this totally new way of living. So they're like the seafarer sailors extraordinaire.
Right. I love that. We could even say even though there would be mountains in areas, maybe they're forested.
There'd be some mountains, yeah.
So maybe the elves have taken over a lot of these.
They're kind of mountainous.
Yeah. So they're the ones
that
actually take over that type of area. And the dwarves are get involved with the sea or the water, and maybe they, do diving deep out in the ocean, and they feel it's this gruff, rough area. So it allows them that same dwarvish nature, but now it's trying to get deep into the not ocean, but this deep into this water and explore.
It's an ocean for sure.
Oh yeah, an ocean. Yeah. Ocean for sure.
It's big enough that I guess historically it was affected by the tides on Faerun.
Oh, perfect then.
Our area that we picked is just under 2,000 square miles.
Oh, perfect.
So it's fairly sizable. It's a good regional area. It would also be cool, maybe dwarves have a bigger lung retention, so they lost their sense of direction underground, but they can hold their breath longer, and maybe they're the ones that build all the ships.
Yeah.
So they're the shipwrights.
That fits. Yeah, they're the ship people.
So they still build stuff, and they are the best at it.
Right.
But it's a totally different area of expertise.
I love that. And you could even slightly, at some point within that 5,000 years, some of the dwarves have created underwater vessels.
Sure, submarines.
Submarines a little bit, and that's kind of their thing.
Yeah, I like that. I don't know why, but talking about the elves being in the mountains and the dwarves being more seafaring, maybe halflings and gnomes are your inventors and traders and merchants. They're very civic-minded for some reason.
Oh, yeah.
So you have a lot of small people who are completely city-dwelling now.
Yeah, I like that. And even put them in weird positions of power.
Right. Governmental roles and
stuff like that.
So halflings are known to be in governorships and the mayors of towns a lot of the time. And maybe halflings in our world get a natural bonus to charisma as well.
I think that, yeah.
Something like that, yeah. So right there, locking in, I feel like we're getting some personality and specificity to our campaign world, much more so than the last two sessions.
Oh, yeah.
So Did you have anything else on the Dragonborn that you wanted to add?
That was the main thing that kind of like...
That was the main thing?
It's just as something to like kind of start out with. Be like, okay, we're shifting some of the roles of these not characters, but people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's interesting. And it also lends to the idea of like, when doing a campaign of this, if someone's like, oh, I'm going to be Dragonborn, it's like, you can.
Fair warning.
Be aware.
Yeah.
That in this world, this is how they're treated. Just like if, John played in this world, he was like, I'm going to be a dwarf. It's like, cool, man. Be aware.
Different.
The dwarves are different here.
Yeah.
And it also, this is off subject a tiny bit, but it also, even talking about this makes me super excited for that Call of the Netherdeep that I want to run. The ocean thing. Like, even just talking about it, I'm like, man, I really can't wait for the that ocean stuff. And we'll keep diving in.
Absolutely.
At the end, I have a few other things I'll talk about.
So you actually came up with this idea, I think, the first session we did on building this, but having Elminster's name be an anagram of his actual name.
Yeah.
So I came up with one just for fun called Stern Melee, and it's got like a little hyphen in there.
Oh, okay.
And so he's known as like the High Magister, essentially.
I like that.
No one sees him. And as I was thinking about that, because my focus when I was prepping for today was I want to just start building a city.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I just want to start working on something. And that's another thing that, looking into Elminster's backstory, is that he comes from the Dales. And the Dales are in the part of the world we picked.
Oh, no way.
Yes. Yes way.
That's so funny.
Yeah. And so he comes from a little town called Shadowdale.
Oh, I know what Shadowdale is.
Yeah. So what if Shadowdale became like the Inquisition Central? And over 5,000 years or however long, like 4,500 years, it's been building up, and now it's known as Delshalad, which again is an anagram of Shadowdale.
Right.
And he's got a small little tower in Shadowdale. So what if it becomes like Saruman's citadel?
Yeah.
And it's known as Tower City colloquially, or City of the Floating Obelisk, because his tower actually floats off the ground. This is like a military city, so you have executors who they're like judge, jury, and executioner. So if you break the law, like, and this specific executor who finds you, like, thinks that you're guilty, like, they can take you out right then. Ooh. So it's a very severe Big Brother, like Germany during World War II type of city-state.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Very scary type thing.
Very scary. Like, you don't want to be a thief and go... crime is very low. But if you break the law, whether you knew it was a law that you were breaking or not, you could be treated very severely.
Right.
So I thought about that. And then I also thought, I listened to the WebDM episode about building cities. And again, lots of good stuff to resource in there. I, of course, will link it in the description because everybody should go listen to all the WebDM episodes. But that one's really good.
WebDM is so great.
Yeah.
So great.
It's basically school for D&D. If you want an education on D&D and how to think about it and how to save yourself some grief on learning D&D, it's a great resource. Jim Davis has this analogy of when you're thinking about the big picture of your city, think about it as a body. So like, what's its nervous system? How does information get around? What's its digestive system? Where does the food come from? What's its waste system, etc.? And I was like, I'm not going to build all this today, but I was like, one interesting, like, fantastical thing, especially leaning into the elemental aspect of this, is what if they had employed a fire elemental to burn all their garbage for them and all their waste, so it's totally polluted and smoggy around the city all the time. So there's some big fire pit, and there's some kind of fire elemental that takes care of all their waste for them. I was like, that's weird. That seems like a very uninviting city. Like, just total Big Brother lockdown, polluted as all get out, floating citadel in the middle. I was like, that's cool. I like that.
Well, just the region, like the dump area, I would want to say it needs some sort of name. And I would even imagine that there'd be, I don't like saying this, but it's the lower class of people might even live around
Right.
the dump,
the shanty town kind of area.
They would have to be careful because sometimes the fire elemental might burn their whole area because it thinks it's just trash.
Right. And how do they keep the fire elemental in line?
Right.
Too is the other question. So maybe they have there's little irrigation moats that run through it. So if the fire elemental tries to come out, everyone starts splashing water. Or they have to get the water elemental to come in and balance it out.
Yeah, maybe the water elemental exists within the moats, and it knows that it has to keep it at bay in certain ways, like to move it around.
What if the sewer system has water has like the water elemental employed, and so they have to go they ring a bell or something, and the water elemental has to come out of the sewage system and deal with
that is
fire
gnarly.
Elemental.
Yeah.
So that's cool. Maybe we would call it the incinerator district or something.
Right.
Something to do with burning or flame, or the Igni district.
Right. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Igneous district.
Something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's something.
Yeah. So here's this, and I'll link to this. I'm going to share my screen with you.
Okay.
Ian.
It's a funny little observation. We rarely say each other's names.
Yeah, it's true.
Oh, that's cool.
So this is the area right here. I cut out the piece. So you got the Sea of Fallen Stars in the middle. You also have Thay, which we haven't really talked about, but there's some crazy magic users that come from Thay. Mm-hmm. So it'd be interesting to at some point develop what has happened with Thay, because obviously Elminster's not gonna let them fuck around. But here's the Dale lands, and there's Shadowdale. So a little further on the outskirts. I would think that that's good, because if the air elemental kind of goes around the sea, you're going to want to have the capital of the world be farther away from the ocean.
Oh, for sure.
Makes sense to me.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I would say just confronting the idea of the Shay, part of me would want to be that it's like a blackened wasteland now, because Elminster knew, not even blackened, but it's a wasteland because Elminster.
Are you talking about Thay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's destroyed, almost like District 13.
Right, there was some kind of conflict early on.
Right, very early on, where
I like it.
Elminster was like, no, I told you can't be doing that shit, and it just turns into just chaos.
I like it. I didn't build anything out, but I picked a bigger city, which was Raven's Bluff.
Oh, okay.
Just as if we were going to start an adventure, you could start there. And then Tilverton, which is in Cormyr. Fun fact about Raven's Bluff, that's where my first character, Pock, is from.
No way.
That's where, when he had his evil mentor, he escaped from there.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. So you know about the city generator. I made just had it generate a city for fun, so there's something to look at. But also now that same person who does the city generator, and I should find their name because I want to credit them, because the resources that they offer for free are fucking awesome.
That's cool.
They now have a world map generator, and I made a world map as well, just for fun, and it populates the cities. You can do you can look at the political boundaries, the elevation boundaries.
Oh shit!
All the details you can think. It just instantly makes it for you. So if you need something quick, it's really cool. Let's see if I can find their name. City generator.
Boom, boom, boom.
Bam, bam. Okay, there's the website, itch.io. And for anybody who is a fan or wants to check out indie games, check out itch.io. There's all kinds of cool stuff on there. That's where the creator of Blades in the Dark, he sells the games he's doing now.
Oh, really? That's cool.
Yeah, and also the people who did Apocalypse, Powered by the Apocalypse, so Apocalypse World.
Right.
They sell all their games on itch.io. It's a really cool resource for indie game makers, whether it's video games, tabletop games, or whatever. What is their name? Is it What About You? Maybe? Yeah, so it's on Twitter. It's at... I'm just going to spell it because I'm looking at it. I think they're from Russia or somewhere in that area, Eastern Bloc. So it's Watawatabou. Watawatabou.
What about you?
Yeah, what about you? So they make a bunch of generators. I'm looking at their itch.io page. They have one called ProcGen Mansion, so you can procedurally generate mansions. They've got one-page dungeon generator, neighborhood generator, medieval city generator, pixel dungeon, village generator, city viewer, which is a 3D generator, Perilous Shores, which is like an old school black and white map generator. Like, amazing. All of this is free, and then they have a Patreon. So I'm definitely going to start supporting them. I keep forgetting to do that. But it's phenomenal for free.
That's
like the stuff they do is so great.
3 of those things that you named would have made my last week so much easier.
Right.
Because like I was telling you, I wanted to try doing a little bit more theater of the mind where I have the map, but I couldn't find any like black and white maps that I felt were big enough to do what I wanted, or they were too small to do what I wanted.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, they were either way too big or way too small. And I was like, I
just need this. I need something in the middle.
Right.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to go check out Philomythia podcast because I know they've got links to something like that.
And then here's one thing I'm going to say. This is a tangent. But why the fuck doesn't anybody link to the resources they talk about? Have you noticed that? Any podcast, like if you go to their Dooblydoo, whether it's on Spotify or YouTube or whatever, they only link to themselves. I'm guessing it's because that's how you drive more traffic to whatever. But it pisses me off.
Yeah.
So I'm vowing, unless for some reason it really hinders like the podcast growth, I'm always going to link to the shit we talk about. As a consumer of content, that really bothers me.
Yeah.
It's like, why aren't you linking to the stuff you're talking about? That's just rude. It's just...
It's a faux pas. Man.
Fucking bitches.
Biatches.
So, back when I was more starting out, not even just a couple years ago, but even when I haven't played RPGs, I've thought about RPGs a lot and thought about running games. And one thing I was always like, I don't want to use random generators to make my maps. I want to make them myself. What you realize is that it's really time consuming. And you may not have time. If you're prepping for you have 5 days to prep for your next session, you may not have time to make a full dungeon map. So that's the great thing about the internet is you have a bunch of free resources to streamline your planning if you need it.
Yeah.
So the city generators and especially like a one-page dungeon, if you just need something quick that's procedurally generated, this guy is it's a great resource. I'm guessing it's a guy. I honestly don't know. I'll call them they for now.
All right. Yeah, I love that. Like, I am glad that I know about it now. I'm going to have to get that info.
Yeah. I'm bummed because I got all the maps prepped. I don't know where they are on my computer. They're hiding from me. So another thing I wanted to show you, this city I've actually encountered before. As I was thinking about Delshan, I stumbled back onto this French city called Mont-Saint-Michel. And it's this French monastery. And that seems like, ooh, monastery, boring. No, awesome. Let me show you images of this because it's like the most fantasy city you've ever seen. It looks like it's straight out of Game of Thrones. Let me find a good one. Here we go. So I'm going to open this and I'm going to share again. So this was kind of my inspiration for the feeling I want the feeling I want the shitty to have is everything kind of cloistered together and it kind of shapes into a mountain.
Oh.
So you're like, okay, what does that mean? I will show you, my friend.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
And another thing that's cool that I probably will take, whether it's for this homebrew we're making or a different campaign setting, is that it's actually out on the ocean, so it's off the coast of Normandy, and the tides come in. So if you just try to walk to the city, they say it's really dangerous. There's quicksand and mud flats, and you can actually drown really easily. Let me give you some more images of this.
Oh, that's really cool.
So like it looks like what you think of like a medieval fantasy city. There it is, covered in water.
Yeah.
And it's been around since like the 800s, something like that.
What?
Yeah. So see how everything's cloistered together? I don't know if I can find it right now, but looking at the streets, they're all very claustrophobic. Let's see if I can find streets. Yeah, look at these. So everything's very small, and claustrophobic is the word that keeps coming to mind. There's no city planning to make right angles and good 90-degree geometry. So this was my vibe or flavor inspiration for Delshan, is kind of this city built on top of a city for thousands of years, where everything has this really lived-in, tight, claustrophobic feel.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, but then you put a floating citadel in the middle of it and fire elementals.
Well, and that, yeah, like putting the fire elemental in there creates a much more intense situation.
Yeah.
To like burn the garbage and everything. It's like, but you have to keep that motherfucker in there, or else he'll burn this whole motherfucking place down, man.
Elementals aren't known to be terribly agreeable.
Right.
So the day-to-day living in a city like that has to be just kind of a nightmare.
Right. Especially if you live near the trash area. Like that's...
Yeah, if you don't have money to live higher up on the hill, so to speak.
Right.
And I thought it'd be fun, since we're building it from Shadowdale, there's like the Giant's Head Inn, and there's these certain landmarks where you could Easter egg them into the city. So if the players walk around, they may not even know much about Shadowdale, so it'll go over their heads. But I thought it'd be fun just to insert some little nods to what's actually going on in there, you know?
Yeah, that's cool.
That was the city building I did, just some initial like personality and identity flavor of the city, as well as, okay, how does this thing work? And making it fantastical. So not just having it be mundane, but, oh, right, we're in a fantasy world.
Right. This is not off subject, but this is, I just had this idea. God, it would be so awesome to take our Friday group and the next long campaign we do, have it be in this world, and me and you kind of switch off DMing. Like every 6 to 8 months we do these big arcs, and then I take over and do an arc, and then you take over and do an arc. And once we get like level 20 characters with these Friday group, you know, do something huge with it. But you know,
it'd be fun
because both of us designing this world, I think that people would have a lot of fun.
Oh yeah,
switching between those two.
We would have to twist it though, so that the big bad and the secrets, if like our players, like Jerry listens to our podcast, and
right,
even if they listen to the podcast, they don't know what's going on.
Well, we wouldn't let them we wouldn't let them go after like the main thing. It would be like all these other arcs to have fun with, like cool stuff that happens.
Well, I would still change all the secrets so they wouldn't even be able to think they know what's going on.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, I think that'd be fun. The more we build this, the more attached we get to it and be like, I want to play in it.
Yeah, exactly.
This is kind of cool. I want to do it.
That's how everything is like that, though.
Right. Yeah. It's called narcissism, guys. Okay. That's what do you want from us? Okay. We're only human. So here was my idea to jump over to some mechanical stuff. This was the last thing I really was inspired to do, was how does the corruption work?
Oh, okay.
Let's just say you're using magic without any what I called special dispensation from the magisterial inquisition. Mm-hmm. What happens if you cast a spell? And leaning again into the elemental chaos, or if we just want to call it chaos.
Let's call it chaos for now.
Yeah, just call it chaos. So the bubble that walls off Hylica is pure chaos. That's the other thing that I thought was, because of this bubble, magic works normally, but it corrupts you. So the Spellplague's going on, magic doesn't work normally at all, people get fucked. It works in here, but there's a high cost to it. It allows magic to work, but anyone who uses it flirts with becoming one of the Cyanus, which means corrupted. Cyan is just a word for blue, and I figured if you become corrupted, you start to have that blue flame mark you.
Right.
So you start to have cracks in your skin, and maybe your eyes turn to blue flame, and there's this, what is it called? I wrote it down because I was like, what if Elminster was this? It's called spell marked, spell touched. Basically, during the Spellplague, if you are affected by something bad happens, but you don't die during the Spellplague, you're marked in some way. And I think that's where the dragon marks came from in Eberron too, was from this idea.
Oh, right. Okay.
But people consider you cursed. And so leaning into that, what if you start to look like that, but more extreme? So here is my, again, this is not play tested. This could not work well at all, but it's a place to start. And this is just for the scene. So if you cast a spell and you fail 6 times, you gain, and you get 6 points of temporary corruption. You get 1 point of permanent chaos.
Oh, okay.
So there's this constant resource management tension where if you fail once, if you take on temporary chaos, it's not a big deal because it's going to wipe as soon as you go back to town. It's a new scene. And this is completely co-opted from Symbaroum, not the mechanics, but the temporary corruption chaos type of idea. So it gets reset. If a player's temporary chaos exceeds their spell modifier, they gain 1 permanent point of chaos. If the player's permanent chaos exceeds their level, they become an NPC having turned into one of the Cyanus. So if you're level 10 and you get 10 points of permanent chaos, you turn into this spell-like being. Now, if you don't use magic, then you use your Constitution modifier instead.
Oh, okay.
So it's your bodily health, essentially. I was like, that seems like a good start. It's a good first draft.
Yeah, just a first draft for sure.
You'd have to try it out to see if it would work the way, in any way, shape, or form like it seems like it might, because it might not.
Right.
But I thought that would be fun, especially if we were going to have our friends playing this, is have some stress all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like have the players mechanically with their characters have to consider, is it worth casting a spell right now?
Yeah.
And if you have, let's say they're part of the Inquisition, if they have this special spell focus which allows them to cast more, maybe they get a bonus to their roll. So it gives them a +1 or 2 on their naked D roll, so they have this modifier to ward off chaos.
Right. Or maybe gives them advantage on that roll.
Or they can make saving throw before they take on permanent corruption, or some way to buffer them against being hurt.
Yeah.
In that way. So that was my idea for that.
Oh, I think that's great. I think as far as we should make it canon until we play test it and then adjust it through that. Like, I think that's a great way to add a fun little flavor to the current system already. Like, kind of like how I added the light, which became focus. Mm-hmm. And, obviously it's still a work in progress. And even as I've been on my walk today, I was thinking of a way, like, if I wanted to make that something that truly worked within my 5e games, I was like thinking, how would I change it as I've been using it to make it work?
Right.
So I think what you're doing, I think that's awesome. Again, it adds like a little bit of flavor for playing D&D in a world that already is kind of established, but now we're just, stirring it up and then, let's make the game different a little bit. There's this new thing. It's a simple mechanic. It's not like a huge thing, but it's something else that's like fun to add to the game.
And it's really inspired by how much fun Symbaroum is to play, which Symbaroum is, you could call it D&D light. It's not associated with Wizards of the Coast or the D&D brand, but you have the same 6 stats, but your characters are much more squishy, and if you cast any kind of magic, you constantly have to worry about becoming corrupted, but it's so fun. It's not like a hindrance to enjoying play. It actually improves it. It makes it more fun.
Nice.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I love resource management when it matters to your character development, I guess if I can say it that way, where your character constantly has to weigh pros and cons and see if the risk is worth it right now, instead of just like, I have these spells and I can use them with impunity until I run out of spell slots.
Right. Yeah, totally.
That's really fun just on the face of it if you're just blasting and casting, but it seems like I more and more as I play, I like the idea from 2nd edition D&D where if you use all your spells as a caster, you are fucking exhausted. You are physically just wrung out. And that's what the spell slots really are supposed to represent, is like your physical stamina to channel magic or arcane force through you. But we don't really talk about it like that. It's just like we have the bullet and the gun analogy now. Right. It's just like I have these things and I load them up and I fire them off, which is really easy to understand.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So it makes sense.
Yeah.
But I love the idea that there is a cost, just like with Raceland. Right? There's a cost every time he uses magic. It is not a fun thing. It's a heavy price to pay to use this preternatural power to do things in the world,
I love that. I think that's cool. And I think that adds to a lot of different stuff flavor-wise and role-play-wise that could be fun. And this is another thing I thought of, like, as a fun addition to thing. When people know magic, it's always like, you just like, I know these spells. Well, I always feel like magic would be something that you would be like a language. You could try and do other things with it.
Right.
But how do you like interpret that into a rule system? And just as like an idea, I was like, it would be cool if like one of your magic users was like, hey, I want to try and just use magic and do this. And you're like, all right, that'll cost you your top spell slot. There you go.
Right.
Simple way to establish something like that.
You know, going back to WebDM, I think it's the... I will do some research, and if I can find it, I'll link to it. But they have an episode where they talk about incorporating magic and magic items into your campaign world, and how it's fairly common knowledge, if you do digging into D&D, that the spells that you have access to are just the spells that we still have available to us in that world. Because we're not at the height of magical innovation. We're actually in this low period. So the fireball spell is just the one that survived, that somebody found in a tomb or in a library at some point and has become the convention. But somebody had to make that spell up.
Right.
Somebody had to invent it and experiment with it. And the DMG, to be fair, has ways to create spells, but it's really, they almost feel like deterrents. Like they don't want to encourage players to make their own spells. So the question would be, how could you make it very rewarding for them to get creative? Because they'll come up with stuff that, as a DM,
it's a nightmare.
Way more creative than you trying to like give them, like, here's a new spell.
Yeah.
Like, let them come up with it.
Oh, for sure.
And I think some of it is make it fun to use materials. That's another thing that I don't know how you would do it and have it be fun, but take away spell focuses.
Right.
So make it really about gathering materials and make that fun, so that it's almost like you're going to make a meal. I need some crow's foot, and I need some wart powder, and I need the Eye of Newt so that I can cast, bat wings or whatever you want to do. And that gives it much more of that weird magic as we think about it from folklore too.
Right.
Yeah. So
I
think the spell slot, doing the high one, like, okay, use your high spell slot. That's fun, but again, it's kind of hand wavy.
Right. It is totally hand wavy.
Right. If you could give them away, like if you think about jazz, like jazz is improvisational, but there's all these scales and time signatures, and there's these materials that they can use to try things out. How could we give our players materials that they can put together and come up with cool things?
Yeah, I love that.
Not sure how to do that, but I'm
not sure yet.
We're going to keep thinking about it. One day we'll do an episode about it. One day. So, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Not on Hylica.
Hillika. Because it's full of hills.
I do have other things that kind of popped up that I wanted to say to you here at the end. Thoughts?
Oh, you know what I think about that?
What?
I think that is fucking stupid. No, I'm just kidding.
That's unfortunate. I just want to tell you things.
Just jashing. Please, lay it on me, brother.
I just thought of another thing first. Last episode, when I do the Jarius pooping sound, and
then it makes a big pow.
When I make that grunting sound, I don't know what I'm doing. I've listened to it like 6 times, and I'm like, what is that, dude?
I love it when you're saying he takes the poop and he's filling in the cracks. Like, fuck you.
Fuck you guys.
Fuck you guys.
That's honestly inspired from younger Jerry.
That makes sense.
Just him being like, fuck you. Just doing his little thing. He's a great. But the other thing I wanted, and this kind of ties into like the idea of adding that corruption to this campaign. Call of the Netherdeep, like I mentioned a second ago, when they were designing it, because now they're starting to like release little interviews and stuff because it's right around the corner. So we're getting a little more info.
Right.
There is they talk about this, what makes Call of the Netherdeep kind of different, or the new thing to it is there is a rival adventuring party.
Yeah, I saw that.
And the idea of that, I was like, that's really cool. Like, because that gives like the characters these social interactions that could be anything from just talking shit to each other to actively trying to hurt each other.
Arch enemies.
Yeah. And you get to develop that as it goes. I was like, that's so exciting. I'm so excited.
It's a cool trope that D&D hasn't done for a while.
Yeah.
So like Dragon Heist has that built in if you want to use it, but it's not like a main feature, where it seems like Netherdeep, they're really putting it
at the front
and center.
Oh yeah.
It's the same thing like how you were talking about last episode about the laws. You know, like Waterdeep has penalties and stuff.
Oh, I love
too.
that.
Yeah, you just don't see it get used or talked about that much, but it is a way to really give your campaign more density, more verisimilitude, as you might say.
So yeah, I'm super excited about that. But the other thing that you mentioned is Eberron. I think it'd be fun to run one of these like 6 to 8 month things we're doing.
Oh my god,
in Eberron.
I think since people are calling things, I'm calling the Eberron because I've wanted to do Eberron for a while. I love Eberron.
I would post that up and be like, I'm doing Eberron. No one touch it.
Yeah.
It's mine.
Okay. I'll say that. Because that one, we've talked about this off air, as a professional say. I will think about ideas or be like, oh man, I wish there was a D&D campaign world that had option C. And then I'll either see an interview or I'll open my Eberron book and be like, holy shit, it's in Eberron.
Right.
So they have all this stuff that I really want for my campaign worlds, including they're letting time progress, which is why you see some of the steampunk stuff. There's trains. Warforged come from Eberron, which now you see artificers and Warforged in all the campaign worlds.
Yep.
You know, they're everywhere. So it's really cool and very unique. And I like the story of how the guy who created it, he just submitted. There was a contest when 3rd edition was really hitting its height, and they liked it well enough that they picked his campaign world.
That's awesome.
I think it's really awesome. Yeah. We have Google. I need to do this more. Let me look his name up so I can credit him.
Cool. That actually might be, just for my own pleasures, one of the books that I buy next, just to kind of look through it.
It's really cool. It's got a lot of stuff, like it's just aesthetically pleasing. Keith Baker.
Nice. Keith Baker.
He's got a blog and he's got a YouTube channel and where he just dives into Eberron. So he's very involved with helping people really delve into the campaign world if they're so inclined.
What's his last name again? Sorry.
Baker.
Baker. Thank you. I'm excited to see what happens with Hylica.
Hillika, huh?
Hylica. Sorry.
Just think about it this way. It's a Greek word. So the Y is always going to have like an I sound. Yeah.
Okay. Hylica. Sweet.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch upon just real briefly, like just a few minutes about what happened in your campaign.
Oh, and when we had our little intermission?
Yeah, a little intermission.
Sure.
Talked about like, what did you tell me about your campaign a little bit? What's going on, man?
So I've hinted at this, but I haven't really talked about it directly. Not anymore, but I was a bit frustrated with just how the last few sessions went, just because I felt like my communication was not being understood. And so my players were making assumptions about my intent, and also that I was throwing things in at the last minute just to make it convenient for me, and such like that. And so there is a tool essentially called the same page tool. And let me look up the person's name, because this one person has a blog. It's all about tabletop gaming. I'm not a big fan of all their articles, but the same page tool is really cool.
The reason I brought this up is because I was, there watching you do this, and there was a lot of stuff about what you did that I was like, this is really cool. Like, just being someone watching as a GM, it made me go, oh wow, this is really cool. Like, this is cool information to like kind of get out there. And I think that, just like we've said, like, it's probably best to do this at the beginning.
It is. That's what it's designed for.
Right. And you could do it in the middle just to take a gauge. Be like, all right, everybody.
Yeah. So this comes from Deeper in the Game, and it's a WordPress blog. And like I said, this is one article among many, but I learned about it from Jim Davis of, again, WebDM, and it's a tool that a lot of people have talked about, just like the Lines and Veils tool. It's this technique or tool that players have come up with to deal with the pervasiveness of D&D, because we're not 15-year-olds playing with no social skills. We're adults, and you can run into problems.
Oh, yeah.
That can actually break friendships, and it seems so silly, but people can take this stuff really personally. I'm not remembering this person's name. They're not coming up, but Deeper in the Game is the name of the blog. It's basically a series of questions, and it's something that the whole party, the whole table is supposed to answer together. So it's not a quiz everyone takes off and answers by themselves. So for instance, the first question is, do you play to win? And it has a couple of options, but I feel like you could always add more in there if you want.
Right.
So there's option A, which is, yes, you totally play to win. The win conditions are ... B, good play isn't a win-lose kind of thing. And the way that the questions are posed are very thought-provoking, and they're questions that we don't articulate or don't think about as lovers of the game, but you realize, oh, that's a really good thing to talk about. Shit.
Yeah.
So especially, doing the smartest thing for your character survival is what a good player does isn't important. What is the GM's role? How well should you follow the rules especially when you're in combat? And so it allowed us to have a really good conversation and, no pun intended, get on the same page.
Yeah.
So it was very positive, and again, a very helpful tool for clear communication, which is at the Philomythia. Stroking out. At the Philomythia podcast here, at the Philomythia podcast headquarters. That's what we're all about. Communication. So I was a little worried about bringing it in just because I really hate those structured, like, okay, now we're all going to talk about our feelings. Question A, how do you feel right now? That makes me a little annoyed, but it didn't have that effect at all. It actually was really good. So
yeah, it was great. I mean, that's about all I wanted you to jump on it, because I feel like that, I mean, we could jump into that whole thing and do a whole episode on it.
We probably should. I would say maybe all the social tools that are available now would be good. And I feel like in a long-term campaign, having an intermission, which is, we're basically treating it as a second zero session, is a good thing to do, where you're checking in with everybody. Does anybody have any grievances that maybe they need to air, or frustrations? Because players might not bring those up unless they're asked. Yeah. There might be things that need to be dealt with that you're not sure, or as Ian and I have both experienced, players feeling like they didn't know what was going on, or they didn't do anything and they felt frustrated because of it during a session.
Oh, I've been there dozens of times. Dozens of times.
And communication, and again, I'm going to say this, I hate communicating about this stuff. If I'm frustrated, I don't want to talk about it. But it's the only way to work through stuff. So if it's a problem, you need to, if you want to keep the game going.
Absolutely.
Right? So same page tool, 5 thumbs up. If you only have 2, I guess 2 is enough then. Fucking non-mutants.
Hylica, hell yeah.
Hylica. I have another thing to say, totally off topic, but it's phenomenal. It's my new favorite thing, is Jason Alexander of the Alexandrian blog fame. And the Alexandrian is considered the gold standard for D&D advice. There's what's called the Alexandrian remix, where he'll take like Dragon Heist, Waterdeep campaign, and he'll redo it in a way that makes a lot more sense and is a lot funner, according to a lot of players. And that's no knock on Chris Perkins or any of the people over at Wizards, but a lot of people have a hard time breaking into these campaigns sometimes, especially if they're newer players. He now has a YouTube channel, and I think it's been around for maybe a year and a half, and his every video is just gold. So good.
Really?
Yeah, I just watched video after video while I was waiting for the last episode to render, so it was being bounced down. And some of them are 5 minutes, some of them are 15 minutes. They're all so good. I mean, this guy worked with Wizard of the Coast and produced modules during 3rd edition, so he's the real deal. But like, he has all these ideas. He talks about the 3-clue rule. He talks about good ways to do sidekicks. He did one on when Rime of the Frost Maiden came out, how to run that and how to make it interesting.
Oh, I would be super interested in that, because I really want to play that, but all of the feedback I've heard is like super frustrating.
Well, he made a good point. I had never heard this and never thought about it, but that a true sandbox game for tabletop is not the same thing as just open world. A true sandbox is where the player's actions determine the outcome. So there's no set outcome. By what the players do, that affects how the DM's going to react. And he has this great, to kind of tie into the sandbox idea, he has this great video on good villains where like you shouldn't think about only having this one big bad, because the players might kill that big bad.
Right.
So he takes like Die Hard. What if the Hans Gruber had been taken out, and then like one of his cronies suddenly has to step up and be the big bad? And it's really good.
Nice.
Like top-notch content, very entertaining, educational, well made, and he's engaging in terms of like listening to him speak. So if you want more cool content, check out his the Alexandrian YouTube page. It's really good.
Oh, is that going to be a link in the Dooblydoo?
No.
Right.
I'm not doing any more links. Fuckers. Yes.
Fuckers.
I will put a link in for sure.
Well, that's about all I've got for now.
I think that's good. Yeah. I feel like that's a good place to end it and take a poop.
I definitely need to do that.
Rub it in the cracks.
Nope, not going to do that.
Fuck you guys.
Fuck you guys.
Fuck you guys. I think, Ian, do you have anything to say to sign us off?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, let's hear it.
Are you ready for it? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Stay sweaty.
Like, share, subscribe.